What are some conspiracy theories that ended up being true? Story 1. The government performs mass surveillance in the name of national security. People think there's actually secret agents listening to every phone call in America, when in reality it's an elaborate computer system that just scans millions of phone calls and picks up certain keywords for review. If they had tens of thousands of people monitoring calls, then this would have leaked really fast. Story 2. Black helicopters. In the 90s tinfoil hat, conspiracy nuts were always talking about upgraded Black Hawk helicopters that were virtually silent at altitude and nearly invisible to radar. Black helicopters were at the top of the list of jokes when it came to conspiracy nuts, along with jokes about alien butt probes and tinfoil hats. But a decade later, when SEAL Team 6 went in and killed Osama, the US government casually admitted the SEALs were dropped in on modified Blackhawks, called black helicopters from the CIA, only because one crashed and couldn't be recovered. Had that helicopter got out, they would have made zero mention of them, probably for years to come. Story 3. The war on drugs started by Nixon was intended to gain political power, not improve public health. You want to know what this war on drugs was really all about? The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. John Ehrlichman, assistant to the president for domestic affairs under President Richard Nixon. Story 4, I'm going to use this to talk about conspiracies in general. The term has a negative connotation because we associate it with the really extreme examples. Moon landing was staged, Earth is flat, and all the governments that are warring are in on it, etc. But all a conspiracy is people making decisions and plans behind closed doors. That crap happens literally all the time. Your friends and family are planning a surprise birthday party for you. That's a conspiracy. And if the way they're acting makes you think they're planning a surprise party for you, you're now a conspiracy theorist. Story 5. That the reason that fruits and veggies are becoming seedless is because companies are genetically modifying so that they can monopolize produce. Because without seeds, the people can't make their own choice to grow their food, thus being completely dependent on their businesses and governments. When global warming rises, causing there to be a shortage of fresh food, a lot of the seeds from fruits we eat are sterile anyway. And that's not because of GM, because seedless fruits and fruits with sterile seeds predate GM tech and just resulted from aggressive crossbreeding and things like graft propagation. Let's not demonize the whole tech of GM here, which has saved many, many lives. Farmer dependency on GM or any specific type of crop they have to buy should be a concern. But if you educate yourself more on these issues, you'll realize that there is valid non-conspiratorial reasoning for some of this stuff happening. It's not really a grand long game conspiracy for when the ice caps melt and put Florida underwater. Story 6. The CIA-Contra Conspiracy. The Reagan administration was selling cocaine to secretly fund the Contras in their efforts to overthrow the Sandinistas, who were in control of the Nicaraguan government in the 80s. So publicly, he was Mr. Just Say No to Drugs, and even began the DARE program in American elementary schools to help in the war on drugs, making multiple public speeches about the harms of drugs and the dangers they present. But behind the scenes, he was having the CIA use the cocaine they acquired through drug busts to be sold and distributed to poor Black American communities to fund the Contras in their attempts to overthrow the Sandinistas, resulting in the crack epidemic and causing massive amounts of damage to millions of American families. But modern conservatives will tell you he was the greatest president ever. Story 7. North Korea claimed the U.S. used biological weapons against them. They showed the shells that deployed infected insects. They showed a video of pilots admitting the crime. At least one captured pilot was from Fort Detrick, where our program is based. The CIA called it brainwashing and denied the claims. Sure, that's possible, but it's also possible they told the truth. Watch Wormwood and make your own call. I think we did it. I think the CIA killed the former head of the bioweapons program before he went public. The subject of the Wormwood series, they used a brilliant cover story involving LSD, which made the public focus on LSD and not a suspicious death. Do you think the president who dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan would blink at using HARD to detect bioweapons 6 years later when the war wasn't going well? Story 8. There are a number of conspiracy theories that have turned out to be true over the years. Here are a few of the most notable ones. 1. The U.S. government's involvement in the Watergate scandal. This conspiracy theory began circulating after snippets of conversation from a 1972 conversation between President Nixon and his chief of staff, Haldeman, were revealed to the public. In these conversations, Nixon and Haldeman discussed plans to use the CIA to spy on and disrupt the activities of Democratic politicians who were seen as a threat to Nixon's re-election campaign. The theory was initially dismissed by many as being far-fetched, but it was eventually proven true when more evidence came to light. Story 9. Biometric scanners. I don't remember the exact details, but in the 70 S80S, an ex-Area 51 employee whistle blew some of the advanced technology being used and experimented in Area 51, one of which was biometric hand scanners that would grant access to specific employees based on their clearance level. Nobody believed him because biometric scanners were deemed too high technologies, too science fiction, until pictures in the scanners began to get declassified. Story 10. Conspiracy. The Canada government was so paranoid about homosexuality that it developed a gaydar machine. The truth, it really happened. In the 1960s, the government hired a university professor to develop a way to detect homosexuality in federal employees. He came up with a machine that measured pupil dilation in response to same-gender exciting imagery. The Canadian government used it to exclude or fire more than 400 men from civil service, the military, and the Mounties. The American government is just as guilty with these 10 secret U.S. government operations revealed. Story 11. In the U.S., tobacco companies spend decades bribing the media, politicians, and scientists to lie about smoking actually being healthy and recommended by doctors. I mean, it was recommended by doctors way back in the 40s and 50s when commercial pre-rolled and filtered cigarettes were becoming common. The logic was that because you were intentionally aggressively inhaling, you were doing good for your lungs by the regular overexpansion thereof. The filters were thought to keep the tar out, so you get a buzz from the nicotine, better lung capacity, and no side effects. Didn't take very long for that to change. Around the mid to late 60s, heavy smokers were being used in clinical trials to show how bad smoking is. And yes, I smoke. Edit. Crap. I forgot to mention that you're right. And Big Tobacco did bribe everyone to think smoking is healthy. Story 12. Government giving people cancer by doing illegal tests on them. For example, in the mid-1950s, and again a decade later, the Army used motorized blowers atop a low-income housing high-rise, at schools and from the backs of station wagons, to send a potentially dangerous compound into the already hazy air in predominantly black areas of St. Louis. But in 1994, the government said the tests were part of a biological weapons program, and St. Louis was chosen because it bore some resemblance to Russian cities that the U.S. might attack. The material being sprayed was zinc cadmium sulfide, a fine fluorescent powder. The area of the secret testing is described by the Army in documents obtained by Martino Taylor through a Freedom of Information Act request as a densely populated slum district. About 3/4 of the residents were black. Story 13. The sinking of the Lusitania. The Germans justified sinking it due to it being used for military transport, while the British claimed it was merely a civilian vessel only. Since the Germans attacked a civilian vessel that included Americans, it caused the U.S. to join the war against them. Looking back, it was quite a jerk move to allow American, and others of course, civilians unknowingly board a vessel being used for military operations during a war without telling them. I wonder what the American public would have thought about that at the time if they knew the British were not being completely truthful. I am not a historian, so if I am missing or skewing any details, please jump in here. Story 14. I don't think many people realize how difficult it is for a government or literally any organization to keep a secret for years, let alone decades. Some of these conspiracies had actual hard evidence to demonstrate their validity. It honestly seems like they get around this by just poisoning the well. If you have 5 people out there spreading bullcrap as the truth and one real whistleblower, what's the difference? Absolutely destroy anyone with evidence like Thomas Drake or Chelsea Manning, and you've got a pretty solid system for keeping things tight. Plus, if a conspiracy requires 100 people to execute, only the top 2 to 5 need to know the full extent of what they're doing. Everyone else gets some innocuous version, and you end up with software developers making encryption software for a contractor that they never know will be used for, say, Prism or the like. We know stuff like MK Ultra and Northwoods were kept quiet for a long time. Stuff like the Lusitania still isn't 100% solid, even a century later. I actually think it's easier to muddy the waters, keep conspirators in the dark, and obscure what's up than people realize. Story 15. According to leaked government documents, it's very probable that the CIA killed Marilyn Monroe. Netflix has a documentary mentioning it. Fascinating stuff. Her phone was tapped for having an affair with JFK and his brother. They were ghosting her. So she talked to a journalist and threatened to expose government secrets. Don't remember exactly what the transcript said, but it was about Roswell and Area 51 crap. Like 2 days later, before she could blab, she overdosed. Suspicious timing, don't you think? Apparently, no government will confirm alien contact because civilians would panic in the streets. We panic over things every day. Why would it matter? And I'm pretty sure we wouldn't care about aliens at this point. When xenomorphs and predators don't scare us, tiny, gray, childlike men allegedly won't scare us either. Not saying I'm deaf a believer, but there are just too many pilots who do to not make me seriously think about it. And the US government sure has a shady past, so why trust their denials anyway? They've been denying shady facts for decades, like presidents keeping it in their pants. Embarrassing. The documentary is called Unacknowledged. Worth a checkout if you haven't already seen it. And check out Bob Lazar on Joe Rogan's podcast, YouTube. He allegedly worked at Area 51. There's also a documentary about him on Netflix, but cannot recommend, as I didn't finish it. It started out really pretentious, so I got bored real quick. If anyone made it through the whole thing, was it worth it? In that case, I might be willing to try again. Story 16. Conspiracy theorists and technologists were certain, dead certain, that the sort of mass surveillance system possessed by the US existed and was being used, and surmised that Britain and other nations were complicit in it. Almost a decade after I first heard mention of the probability that such a thing existed, Mr. Snowden revealed the existence of exactly that thing to the world, as well as the details of how it operates, and how utterly liberty-destroying it is. As it turned out, even the tinfoil hat-wearing people in the world underestimated the sheer level of criminality and abuse that the system made possible. For many years, if you were to say to an American person that for decades, and still continuing to this day, the US government routinely involves itself in regime change operations, economic destabilization efforts, and deliberate sabotage of nations south of the US-Mexico border, the odds were that 9 times out of 10, you'd be called an idiot for even suggesting that the great and wonderful United States of America would ever do something so shady. These days, it is actually commonly known that CIA operatives had a hand in the initial creation of most of the serious cartel networks at one time or another, run guns across the border on the regular, blew up passenger aircraft, committed assassinations of politicians, and also fostered rebellions by very shady people with shady political beliefs, just to keep the nations south of the US-Mexico border powerless and reliant on cooperation with and use of the petrodollar. Most recently, PMCs were captured trying to start some kind of revolution, and the deafening silence from the sort of people who used to deny the facts to one's face was very succulent and flavorful. Story 17. Aliens and UFOs are real, and they've been covered up, and the subject stigmatized ever since the Brookings Institute advised the Pentagon in the 1960 Brookings Report that disclosure would disrupt economic stability, national security, and potentially cause mass panic. We're slowly being drip-fed the truth now, with the New York Times releasing footage of UAPs in operation, several patents from the Navy describing anti-gravity spacecraft, as well as a zero-point or quantum vacuum energy device, and more open dialogues regarding the phenomenon and technologies from government representatives involved around the globe. This and the upcoming announcement of life on other bodies within our solar system, to be announced by NASA sometime before the next election. Story 18. That there actually might not be any gold in Fort Knox. There's a lot of stuff that doesn't add up about it, and I've been there in my time in the Army, and it was boring as crap, with a pretty relaxed security as compared to other installations I've been on. When this conspiracy was hitting its peak in 2017, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin took a $27,000 military aircraft trip there. There are pictures of him in a weird chalkboard-lined room with several stacks of what appear to be gold bars behind him. But oddly enough, these pictures are in a grainy black and white, so you can't actually confirm what he's holding. Before this trip, the last known outside audit of Fort Knox was in 1953. It's the only conspiracy I can get behind. Story 19. The Vatican is hiding stuff. Old scrolls, forgotten books, all sorts of stuff. I really don't think this is a conspiracy theory. If you want to have a look at a book/scroll/whatever from the Vatican archive, you need to request that book. Kicker is, They don't publish a list of their inventory, so you need to know what is in there. They won't even tell you if a book is there or not, or they don't want you to see it. To be fair, some libraries work something like that. I study archaeology and had some classes on Christian art history, archaeology. Also, there are a ton of conflicting religious texts out there. It was only when the Eastern Roman emperors, Constantine, Justinian, or Valentinian especially, had their councils that the whole Christian thing was streamlined. There were different Christian communities all around the Mediterranean at first, and they often incorporated local legends and content from other religions. Later on, when 300, 400, Christianity got a little more prominent, they even had disagreements to the point where Constantine and later emperors had to step in. Just have a look at the apocryphal writings known today so you can kind of extrapolate what was around back in the day. Story 20. North Korea hasn't been properly Kim controlled since Kim Il sung, who died in 1994. Since then, it's been a military junta, and the Kims are kept on somewhat of a leash for continuity and to give the plebs something to rally around and focus on. Fear keeps them in line, and it's all theater that gives them a sense of purpose so they don't ask too many questions. Kim Jong il even said to a foreign visitor that it was all fake and his people hated him. The elites are effectively held to ransom in a life of obscene luxury. And there is a lot of paranoia, jockeying, and rival factions. High ranking defectors and various diplomats have actually hinted at this. It's also well known that the top military ranks know their situation is a joke and that they would get squashed by anyone they went to war with. It's just yet another way of rallying the population around a cause and keeping them on their toes. South Korea and the CIA have also said that they cannot be 100% sure exactly what's going on and how the system really works. There have also been leaks that suggest the well-informed North Korean diplomatic class are privately not happy with one Kim after another and feel that something has to give. For what it's worth, I don't see North Korea surviving in its current form for another 25 years. The situation there now appears to be truly desperate and the worst that's been seen in years. Story 21. Atlantis was real. It was located in Northwest Africa at a place now known as the Richat structure. It wasn't an advanced, futuristic society that sunk to the bottom of the ocean, but it was a port city with wider access to information and latest technological advancements, and was washed away in the Great Flood, depicted in numerous cultures and religions. Its reputation and fate were exaggerated over, as does often happen with documented historical accounts. Story 22. The Titanic never sank. The Olympic sister ship hit a Navy carrier and was found at fault, causing the White Star Line thousands in damages. This was proven by records. The theory is the Olympic was taken back to the shipyard, cosmetically repaired, and the nameplates were switched. Then she sailed under the name Titanic and was sunk on purpose for the insurance money. There was never supposed to be a loss of life, as there were 3 rescue vessels around the area she had sunk. Proven fact. Though all 3 underwent a problem that contributed to them not reaching or communicating with the Titanic in time that fateful night. And 2 of the ships got cited for being in a place they shouldn't have been by maritime officials. Their logs showed they weren't supposed to be there yet. They were recorded as sitting stagnant at those coordinates for days, proven by citation record. In addition, the direction was wrong. The Titanic sailed further north of the shipping lanes than she was supposed to. This would also explain why the temp went from 70s mid-afternoon to icy by nightfall. The temp dropping is another proven fact according to witness statements. The Titanic also underwent a series of misfortunes during its voyage. Binoculars lost, wrong coordinates, using SOS instead of CQD, exceeding recommended specs, all of which contributed to its sinking and the tragic loss of life. There's a few documentaries and a few books written about it. Interesting concept, and by now, completely unable to prove or disprove. Story 23. There's been at least one great reset, essentially resetting to Stone Age, or there was a dominant species before us. Think of things like the London Hammer and other out-of-place artifacts, unexplained finds that are far more advanced for their discovery, or something that appears out of time. One part of this conspiracy theory is the Earth has a built-in reset standard, which appears as global warming or cooling, and not only rocks advancements so hard we're reset, but introduces new species, rapidly evolved species, to replace extinct ones to keep balance. If there was a dominant species that wiped themselves out before us, the global reset chose humanity to advance. Thus why there's a missing link in the evolutionary theory. I don't know if I believe this one, but it would explain a few things, and at least be more interesting than global warming will reduce the planet to barren deserts with toxic oceans. Story 24. Both the Democrats and Republicans stage and fake their beef with each other as a way of distracting the population while they do shady stuff behind the scenes. Think about it. How else would Trump and Hillary go from being the best of pals, who called each other exemplary people, to hating each other over a campaign? Plus, the fact that the same old people in Congress stay there for years on end, people from both parties. Another thing is that years ago, Democrats and Republicans didn't fight nearly as much, but now it almost seems cultish how they push hatred against each other. Add that with the fact that many politicians had connections with the same types of people, I'm led to believe they fake their hatred as a means of division and distraction while they leech off of everyone's tax dollars. Story 25. America and Russia are not now, nor have they ever been, enemies. The two's agreement at the end of World War II was to wage proxy wars in order to divide up the remaining unconquered world. America being planned to come out on top as their government, and Britain's was more at the seat of the true economic power, namely the World Bank and IMF, whose executives and representatives in other countries, such as the head of the Federal Reserve, have true control of the economy and most likely governments as well, whose actions set it motion. The massive industrialization of genetically modified corn, the economic housing crisis, and the value of the US dollar, whose values often change depending on our relationship to other countries, in specific, Russia. Story 26. Nothing really too sinister, but here's one that I believe technology is spying on you. Want to post a picture on Facebook or Instagram? They need access to your camera and photos. Want to record something on Snapchat? They're going to need access to your camera and microphone. Want to friend someone in your contacts? They'll do that for you, but they're going to need access to your contacts. Want to find out where the nearest McDonald's is? Google will be happy to do that, but they're going to need your permission to access your location. Facebook and websites, actually pretty much every media format, openly admits to tracking your internet cookies to sell ads. Your phone number is most likely on the internet. Google your name, your address will come up, which is actually public information, so nothing you can really do about that. But there's a good chance that your phone number comes up too. It will be disguised as XXXXX, correct last four digits. I believe landlines are still public information, so it really shouldn't be a shock if it's on the internet, but cell phones are not, yet they're pretty accessible. I 100% believe that phones and apps take your information, that you give permission for them to access, by the way, and sell all of your internet history, photos, videos, contacts to advertisers, scammers, telemarketers, etc. I think this is also a big reason why you see TV ads for something you were just talking about. I think big corporations buy all the information and they see what interests the audience has and makes connections. They see what you're Googling at noon and what you're Googling at 3 a.m. and what type of music you're listening to, what you were texting to someone, what kind of sports you follow, etc. And they line it up to when they think you're watching TV and what they think you'll be watching.